My name is Dana Reynolds. I'm 34 years old. I own a small company called Reynolds Systems LLC. If you passed me on the street, you wouldn't recognize me. I don't do in-person meetings. That's never been my style. I work quietly, behind the scenes. For the past 2 years, I've been a mechanical consultant. During that time, I managed the entire industrial control system for Milner Freight, a mid-sized logistics company, all from my home office. I didn't have an employee badge. I wasn't in their HR system. I wasn't part of the staff. I was simply a contractor, a vendor. But the system I built? That was the heart of their distribution warehouse. I designed it from the ground up. Automated conveyor controls, inventory routing, RFID synchronization, every piece of it. The warehouse workers didn't care how any of it functioned as long as it did. And for 2 years, it worked perfectly. That changed when Hunter McKendry arrived. Hunter had no real understanding of the system I created. He was fresh out of graduate school, MBA in hand, wearing a shiny watch that probably cost more than my rent. He joined the company as the new director of process integrity, which was really just a fancy title for someone whose job was to cut costs. And that's exactly what he focused on. The problem was, he didn't understand how anything actually worked. He only looked at the numbers. When he noticed my monthly invoice, he asked, "Why are we leasing conveyor controls we already own?" Like he was about to earn a gold star for the question. I originally got the job through Lisa, the former operations director. She'd heard about me from another consultant who had been dealing with the same problems Milner Freight was facing: constant system crashes, scanners falling out of sync, packages going missing, and orders being sent to the wrong places. It was a complete logistics mess. Lisa was desperate, and I had the solution. I told her exactly what the real issue was. They were relying far too much on outdated, unreliable in-house wiring. The whole setup was a disaster, a patchwork of failed fixes stacked on top of each other. It couldn't keep up with their growing workload. My solution was to build an external control layer, something I could manage remotely. No more cables running through the building, no more temporary fixes. I would host the logic boards at my own facility and rebuild the entire system from scratch. They would get a clean, easy-to-use dashboard, smooth handheld interfaces, accurate routing, and reliable performance across the board. No downtime, no recurring problems, just results. Lisa didn't hesitate. She said she didn't want to deal with the technical details. She just wanted the system to work. She signed the contract on the spot. No arguments, no questions. She didn't even bother reading the fine print. And honestly, why would she? To her, I wasn't a risk. I wasn't competition. I was just a vendor. Someone brought in to fix a problem and keep things running. They never bothered to read Section 2.3. It clearly stated that all controller logic, physical routing interfaces, and embedded protocols would remain the property of Reynolds Systems LLC unless ownership was officially transferred in writing after a full buyout. At the time, I wasn't concerned. I knew every inch of that system, inside and out, and I had no intention of doing anything dishonest. All I wanted was for the job to run smoothly. I had built the entire system from scratch. Every line of code, every circuit board, every connection belonged to me. The logic boards were housed at my own facility, not theirs. What they received was a sleek, easy-to-use dashboard, and for 2 years everything worked flawlessly. No crashes, no downtime, no complaints. Their handheld devices, terminals, and scanners all depended on my off-site control servers. But no one there cared about the mechanics behind it. They only cared that it worked. I'd made it effortless for them. Workers would clock in, grab their scanners, and everything was already synced. Orders flowed. Boxes moved where they were supposed to. The warehouse ran like a well-oiled machine. They didn't need to understand how the system functioned. That wasn't their responsibility. Mine was to make sure it never failed. And for 2 years, it didn't. Then Hunter McKendry entered the picture. That's when things started to shift. I honestly don't think Hunter ever grasped how much money and chaos that system had saved the company. To him, it was just another line item on a budget sheet. He didn't realize that pulling on even one part of that setup could cause the entire operation to fall apart. Still, I wasn't worried. He struck me as just another guy with a shiny degree and very little real-world experience. What was a fresh MBA going to do? Stare at spreadsheets, point at numbers, and assume he could cut costs without understanding the fallout. That's exactly what I expected. And that's exactly what happened. When Hunter saw my invoice, he didn't see reliability or stability. He saw what he thought was an opportunity, a chance to optimize and streamline. He didn't see a complex system holding everything together. He saw a price tag. And that's when the real problems began. Even then, I stayed calm. I had a solid contract, and I designed the system to last. All he needed to do was understand it. But he wasn't interested in understanding anything. He wanted changes, he wanted cheaper, he wanted shortcuts. That's when I knew we were heading straight toward trouble. Hunter McKendry was not the kind of person I expected to be making decisions about my work. He looked like he belonged in a boardroom, holding a glass of whiskey, not standing in a warehouse trying to figure out how conveyor belts and scanners actually functioned. Fresh out of grad school, perfectly polished, like someone who had memorized leadership theories but never stepped into the field. Expensive watch, tailored suit, confident smile, and absolutely no clue what I'd built. It took less than a week for him to start digging around. He began auditing vendor expenses, and of course, my monthly invoice caught his attention. It was higher than he liked. "Why are we leasing conveyor controls we already own?" he emailed. I stared at the message for a moment. It was a lazy question. It showed no understanding of my role or what I provided. It was clear he was just searching for a way to trim costs. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sent over system logs, uptime reports, error-free performance cycles, and operational metrics. Everything that showed how reliable the system was. I also quoted Section 2.3 of the contract. Systems under vendor custody. Short, direct, and very clear. My system. My terms. He didn't read it. The next day, I received another email, even vaguer than the first. "What exactly are we paying for?" That's when I realized this wasn't just curiosity. It was the beginning of a bigger move. Hunter wasn't asking questions anymore. He was already planning something, and based on how he was going about it, I knew he hadn't thought it through. I didn't reply directly. I sent a clean performance summary and a link to the full documentation. Then I waited. The next message was a meeting invite. The title said, "Process Consolidation and Vendor Realignment." I didn't even need to open it to understand what was coming. He had already decided. He was going to try to cut me out, take my work, and claim ownership of the system on their terms. Honestly, it almost felt ridiculous. Hunter, in his shiny suit and MBA confidence, thought that having a title meant he could reorganize things without understanding what he was touching. He was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. When I clicked on the invite, my stomach tightened. I knew I had to be careful. I wasn't going to let some clueless grad school kid walk off with something I'd spent 2 years building. This wasn't off-the-shelf software. It was my work, built from the ground up. And I wasn't about to let Hunter McKendry rewrite the rules just to save a little money. I accepted the meeting. A few hours later, the full invite came through. It was a basic Zoom call. Just Hunter and 2 people from HR. No agenda, no details. Just a time slot labeled "Next Steps." I felt uneasy, but I was ready. Hunter wasn't going to catch me off guard. I'd dealt with his type before. He had that smooth, rehearsed tone, like he believed he was playing 3D chess while everyone else was still learning checkers. He didn't waste time. "We're internalizing core operations," he said, as if it were some groundbreaking strategy. "Effective immediately, your contract is terminated." I didn't interrupt him. I let him keep talking. This wasn't the first time someone had tried a move like this. Then he said, "We'll need a full handover of all logic scripts, diagnostic interfaces, and source configurations." That's when I spoke. "Did you read Section 2.3 of the agreement?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. There was a pause. I could hear it. The hesitation. The mental scrambling. But he wasn't ready to back down. "We paid for this system," he replied, as if that settled everything. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "You paid for access to the controls," I said, "not ownership." Silence filled the call. I could tell he didn't like being corrected. But that didn't matter to me. I had built the system. It didn't become his just because a check cleared. I didn't wait for his response. I opened my file manager, selected the zip folder I had prepared in advance, and sent it over. It contained everything: simulation models, full documentation, architecture diagrams, all neatly packaged. It looked legitimate, and technically, it was. But it wasn't connected to my facility. No live data, no signal, no real control. It was a polished replica, convincing enough to pass a glance, but underneath it, there was nothing holding it together. None of it would function without my servers. Hunter probably believed the situation was finished. I watched his screen as he opened the file I'd sent. He flipped through the folders, clearly looking for some hidden catch, but he didn't see it. Not yet. What he found seemed to satisfy him. He nodded to himself, likely convinced this was everything he needed. Then, without saying a word, he removed me from the call. Just like that, my screen went black. The meeting ended. No closing remarks. No goodbye. Just a click and silence. I sat there for a moment, staring at the dark screen, feeling the weight of it all settle in. It wasn't over. Not even close. But from Hunter's point of view, it probably felt like it was. He thought he had won. He thought he could operate the system without me. He was wrong. And he was about to find out. I didn't linger after the call. I needed fresh air and distance. So I left the house and walked to the diner down the street. It was a small, worn-down place with cracked vinyl booths and a thick smell of grease that never seemed to fade, no matter the hour. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered black coffee. No sugar. No cream. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or comfort. While I waited, I opened my dashboard on my phone. The account was still active. Milner Freight. That wouldn't last. I navigated through the menu and marked their account as access withdrawn. There was no dramatic shutdown. No flashing lights. No alarms. I simply stopped responding to their system requests. No data. No routing updates. No back-end support. From that moment on, they were on their own. I took a sip of the coffee as it arrived. It was too hot and burned my tongue, but I barely noticed. That sting was nothing compared to what was about to hit them. Within minutes, their handheld devices, terminals, and scanners began to lose synchronization. The system was effectively gone for them, even if they didn't realize it right away. On the warehouse floor, things would still appear normal for a short time. Forklifts continued moving. Workers scanned boxes. Orders were processed like any other day, but the foundation was already cracking. I didn't turn anything off. That wasn't my move. I simply stopped responding. The routing timers I'd designed, the ones that quietly kept everything flowing, began ticking down. Slowly, precisely. The workers had no idea yet, and they wouldn't for a bit. The alarms didn't sound immediately, but I could see everything from my side. The system started to choke. Conveyors slowed, then stopped. Forklifts idled in front of frozen belts. Scanners chirped uselessly at empty or mismatched slots. Orders stalled mid-process. I checked my phone again and watched the uptime graph flatten completely. No activity, no cycles, no updates. A moment later, an automated alert appeared on the dashboard. Clean, neutral, straight to the point. Routing controls currently under vendor custody per active agreement terms. That was all it said. I didn't need to monitor it constantly. I already knew what would happen next. They would scramble. They would try to diagnose the silence. Calls would be made. Emails would fly. Panic would spread. But I wasn't answering. Not now. The soft hum of the diner felt far removed from the chaos I knew was building miles away. I took another sip of coffee, letting it cool this time. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were already racing ahead. I could picture the warehouse perfectly. The confusion on the floor, the frustration creeping in. Hunter and the others pointing fingers, throwing blame around, trying to force answers out of a system that wasn't listening anymore. They weren't going to fix it. Not without me. I set my phone down and looked out the window at the passing cars, completely unaware of what was unfolding just a short distance away. I wasn't anxious. Not yet. But I knew it wouldn't be long before they reached out. The first email hit about 20 minutes after I revoked their access. Then another. Then another. They poured in one after the other, each more frantic than the last. Why is the system down? Where is the routing data? What the hell is going on? Hunter tried calling me. The first call rang until it stopped. The second went straight to voicemail. By the third attempt, he left 3 voicemails back to back, his voice growing more strained and desperate with each message. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I already knew what Hunter was saying. He was asking for help, trying to understand what had gone wrong, trying to sound in control while everything burned down around him. But he hadn't earned my attention. Not yet. Inside the warehouse, things were falling apart fast. Dead zones started popping up across the floor. Employees scanned items that no longer appeared in the system. Orders backed up. Forklifts stopped moving. Packages stacked higher and higher. The entire operation slowed, then nearly stopped. It was complete chaos. That's when the customer calls began. I didn't answer those either. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly what they were dealing with. Their supply chain was jammed, and they had no idea how to get it moving again. I could feel the frustration through the email threads piling into my inbox. Panic was creeping into every message. The moment that really mattered came next. The CEO of Milner Freight emailed me directly. I'd never spoken to him before. I knew his name, nothing more. His message was short and unnervingly clean. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my documents folder and attached a single-page PDF titled Emergency System Restoration Terms. No fluff, no legal gymnastics, just clear, direct conditions. The price was double my usual annual fee. Payment upfront, no exceptions. And most importantly, this did not include a full buyout. This was a lease. Temporary access only. If they wanted ownership later, that would be a separate conversation with a very different price. I hit send and leaned back, watching the clock. The response came quickly, but not the way I expected. Instead of agreement, I received an email from their IT department. They were trying to rebuild my system. They had taken the zip file I sent and attempted to plug it into their own infrastructure. Whatever they thought would happen clearly didn't. About 10 minutes later, the logs started rolling in. Script errors, checksum mismatches, system failures stacked on top of each other. I opened a few of the logs and stared at them for a moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed a short reply. No soft language, no padding. You didn't notice the repository has no live connectors. This is a simulation. You will not make it work without the actual system running at my facility. That was it. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. They were trying to reverse engineer something they had never truly owned and never fully understood. I didn't bother watching them fail any further. Time was doing that work for me. I knew they'd come back. Not with questions this time, but with money. And they did. The Zoom invite arrived shortly after I sent the PDF. I opened it and saw the meeting scheduled for 4:30 p.m. Attendees listed the CEO, the head of operations, members of their legal team, and Hunter. They were finally ready to talk. When I joined the call, I could almost feel the tension bleeding through the screen. No one wasted time on pleasantries. The CEO, Greg, tried to keep things professional, but there was strain in his voice. He wasn't clueless. He knew they'd made a serious mistake. He wasn't calling to argue. He needed a solution. Dana, he began, we understand there's been some confusion here. We're trying to resolve this as quickly as possible. His tone was controlled, like he hoped calm would fix the damage. Their lawyer sat beside him, flipping through papers. Her eyes kept darting to the screen, then back to the contract. When she spoke, her voice was sharp and deliberate. This fee you're requesting, she said, then paused before continuing, is completely unjustified. It doesn't reflect our original agreement. I let the silence stretch. Let her think I might bend. I didn't. You disconnected the control panel, I said evenly. Now you want me to restart it. That's the fee. Greg looked like he wanted to argue, but Hunter sat frozen, staring at his screen, silent as ever. It wasn't the first time I wondered how someone so clearly out of his depth had landed that role. He hadn't said a word, and yet he'd already proven he didn't belong in that room. Greg cleared his throat. We can't just accept these terms. That's a lot of money, Dana. The lawyer leaned in. We'd like to propose half up front and half once the system is restored. We need assurances. I didn't hesitate. That's not how this works. Another pause. You could almost hear them recalculating. Finally, Greg leaned forward. You have to understand, we're in a very difficult position. This system is critical to our operations. I leaned back and let the silence sit for a moment before answering. I don't offer discounts, I said flatly. You want the system back? You pay the full amount up front, no exceptions. They exchanged looks. The legal team whispered among themselves. At that point, it wasn't negotiation anymore. It was survival. Greg broke the silence. Okay, we'll pay it. I didn't wait for anything else. I clicked leave meeting and ended the call. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. The wire transfer confirmation hit my inbox. Full payment. Exactly as requested. I got to work immediately. I opened my terminal, reconnected to their network, and initiated the rerouting process. I'd done it 100 times before, but this time carried weight. I knew what was happening on the other end. Within 5 minutes, I saw the first signs of life return to the system. The status lights across their system flickered back on. One scan went through. Then another. Then another. In less than 10 minutes, the conveyors were moving again. Orders flowed like a pulse returning to a body that had been still for far too long. The heartbeat was back. I leaned back in my chair and watched the system wake up. It wasn't personal. It was business. Still, it felt good to remind them who actually controlled the machine. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Hunter. It showed up in my LinkedIn notifications, polished to the point of feeling fake. He had sent it right after the wire transfer, probably hoping it would get buried once things settled down. Tough day. Learning experience for all of us. Would love to grab a virtual coffee sometime. I stared at it for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or shake my head. It wasn't an apology. Not even close. Just a weak attempt to smooth things over. I marked it unread and moved on. The real surprise came the following morning. A new email sat in my inbox. This one from their VP. The subject line didn't dance around anything. Proposal. Exclusive 5-year retainer agreement. I opened it, expecting the usual corporate language. Instead, I found something very different. They had gone all in. On the surface, the offer looked generous. A long-term retainer. Guaranteed income. Stability for years. The kind of deal most consultants would jump at without hesitation. But as I read more closely, the trap became obvious. Phrases like strategic partner and full-service exclusivity were everywhere. They weren't just hiring me. They wanted to own my time, my access, my expertise. They wanted me locked down. No other clients, no flexibility. They weren't buying my work. They were trying to buy my future. I let the proposal sit for a few minutes and thought it through. Then I opened my contract editor and started rewriting it. First, I removed every reference to shared intellectual property and co-developed assets. That was a hard no. I wasn't handing over my IP in exchange for promises. Next, I added a 90-day offboarding clause. If they ever decided to end the relationship, they'd still owe the full contract value. No loopholes, no early exits. If they wanted out, they'd have to pay their way out. Then I made the biggest change of all. Full payment upfront, every year. No monthly invoices, no delays. If they wanted my services, the money had to clear before I did anything. Finally, I tightened control where it mattered most to them. Routing protocols. Every clause involving system access made one thing clear. I was the gatekeeper. Period. I wasn't going to let them drain me again or pretend they could cut costs by squeezing my side of the deal. When I finished, I read the contract from top to bottom. It was cleaner, stronger, and firmly in my favor. I sent it back. Less than an hour later, their reply arrived. They accepted every single change. That didn't surprise me. They didn't have another option. They were right back where they started, depending on me to keep their operation running. They needed me more than I needed them. And that's when something finally clicked for me. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. It had turned into a power move. I had the leverage now, and I wasn't giving it back. They had been forced to come to me, and that fact wasn't lost on either side. I closed the email with a small smile. I had them exactly where I wanted them. A few weeks later, their new director of operations reached out. Not Hunter. He had been quietly pushed into a role called Special Initiatives. The new guy's name was Alan. He was more experienced, more involved, and carried himself with steady confidence instead of panic. Alan's first request was telling. He asked me to build a training course for their tech leads on infrastructure literacy. The message was respectful. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in the tone, like they knew they had messed up and wanted to make sure it never happened again. It wasn't an apology. It was an offering. I agreed, but only at my standard hourly rate. No discounts. This was a lesson they needed to pay for, and I wasn't about to give it away. We set up the session, and when I logged in, I could tell Alan had prepared his team. Every tech lead was on camera, eyes alert, probably realizing how much they didn't know. The room felt tense. I didn't mind. This was my space now. They weren't here to debate. They were here to learn. All right, I said once we got past introductions. This isn't a class on how to run a warehouse. It's a class on how your warehouse actually runs. There's a difference. I could see it land. People sat up straighter. They were paying attention. I didn't soften anything. I explained how the entire operation depended on a system they barely understood. They had scanners, terminals, and impressive hardware. But without my control layer, none of it functioned. And without understanding that foundation, they were operating blind. I had them build a dependency list. It wasn't comfortable for them, but that was the point. What do you own? I asked. What do you rent? They looked at each other, clearly realizing they'd never been forced to think about it this way. Some started writing. Others just stared at their screens, unsure where this was heading. I let them struggle for a bit, then stepped in. You own your forklifts. You own your scanners, I said. You rent software licenses. You rent hardware. But what do you actually depend on? What fails when you pull the wrong plug? That's when the understanding started to sink in. Alan was nodding, his attention locked on me now. He already saw the point forming. I shared a simple chart. No visuals, no polish. Just a list. At the top, in bold, Reynolds Systems, ownership, external, function, primary routing and control, risk, complete operational failure. I didn't explain it. I didn't have to. I let the silence do the work. After a moment, Alan cleared his throat. So if we pull the plug on you again, I cut him off. If you ever pull the plug on me again, I said calmly, you're betting your entire operation on the belief that you can fix it yourselves. I paused. And you can't. You're not set up for that, I continued. Not now. Not ever. You're lucky you made it this far. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Alan spoke first, calmer than I expected. We didn't fully understand the risks, he said. We see that now. Good, I replied. That's why we're here. We spent the next hour breaking everything down. Logistics, processes, weak points. I had them map out every dependency, hardware, software, outside vendors. They had no idea how much of their operation was hanging by a thread until I laid it out in front of them. By the end of the session, they were writing backup plans. Real contingencies. Not for when things ran smoothly, but for when they didn't. The questions changed too. They weren't asking how the system worked anymore. They were asking how to keep working when parts of it failed. That was the shift. They finally understood how deeply they relied on something they didn't control and didn't fully understand. And I wasn't about to let them forget it. As the meeting wrapped up, Alan looked at me with a different expression. More respect this time. Thanks, Dana, he said. This was exactly what we needed. I didn't smile. There was no point. The lesson had been delivered. Whether they actually learned it was on them. 3 weeks passed. Everything ran smoothly. No drama. No frantic emails. No desperate calls. They honored the agreement, paid on time, and stayed in their lane. The system did exactly what it was built to do, and I didn't hear from Milner unless it was for a clear request or a routine report. It was quiet. I liked it that way. Then the emails started coming in. 2 major logistics companies, big ones, the kind that worked closely with Milner, reached out directly. They wanted meetings. They wanted me to handle their systems, their infrastructure. They'd heard what I'd done and liked what they saw. The messages were polite, professional. But underneath, I could hear the urgency. They needed someone who could clean up their mess and make sure they weren't trapped by vendors who didn't know what they were doing. I stared at the emails for a moment. I didn't respond. Not yet. My exclusive contract with Milner was still fresh. The timing wasn't right, and I wasn't about to risk anything by moving too fast. I had a few more months before I could even consider outside offers. Instead, I opened a new document, Reynolds Systems Pricing Model 5.2. I paused for a second, then started typing. This time, everything would be prepaid. No more end-of-year invoices, no more delays. I set a clear hourly rate for support, added emergency rates, and removed any hint of favors or flexibility. If someone wanted my time, they would pay for it up front. In full. No exceptions. I saved the file and leaned back. My old mouse sat on the desk, scratched and worn from years of use. I hadn't noticed how much it blended into my routine until then. Seeing it made me realize how much had changed. I ordered a high-end programmable mouse, smooth, precise, worth every dollar. It wasn't a souvenir, it was a tool. A small but deliberate upgrade. A reminder that I wasn't here to be another replaceable part. I had made Milner learn the difference between cost and value. The mouse wasn't for show. It was for the work. For the moments when I made people pay for my expertise. They'd understand that soon enough.